Lesson Planning Rubric Explained. In this video, you'll learn about the components of the full Louisiana Tech Lesson Plan Rubric. Now that you have seen the Louisiana Tech Lesson Planning template and the associated directions, and we've gone over those, we're going to look at the rubric that is used to score any evaluation based off the Louisiana Tech Lesson Planning format. So this is found on Moodle directly below the lesson plan template, and here's the rubric. Also with this one, don't get too freaked out. I know there's a lot of verbiage in here. As you go on through your program, you're going to understand what a whole lot more of this is. For the purposes of our assignment, I will not be assessing everything that can be found in this rubric. Y'all have a modified rubric that I will go over in another video, but I want you to understand what is required of the actual full rubric. Now, I'm going to tab back and forth between the actual rubric and the lesson plan template so I can show y'all where these sections are, where these indicators, where they're looking for evidence. So the first indicator is demonstrating knowledge of content and pedagogy. And remember, content is what you're teaching. Pedagogy is how you teach it. So your methods. They're going to be looking for evidence that you have a knowledge of content and pedagogy in your lesson foundations and your pedagogy section. So let's flip back over to the template real quick and see what that is. So here's your foundations. And then remember, this section down here is your pedagogy. So anything in there can be used as evidence that you have met or the level of which you have met demonstration of your knowledge of content and pedagogy. So you're always going for distinguish, this column over here. So they're going to look for evidence of these indicators. I'm not going to go through them all because y'all are adults and fully capable of reading, but I want to show y'all specifically where they're going to look for these things. So demonstrating knowledge of students. This is demonstration that you actually know your students and you know what their needs are. And this evidence is found in your lesson foundations. So if we pop back over to the template, that's everything in here. They will be looking for evidence that you know your students and you know how to best meet their educational needs in that lesson foundation. And setting instructional outcomes. This is where we talked about learning outcomes inside the lesson plan, and that's exactly where they're going to look, is your learning outcomes and also your standards. Because when you're setting instructional outcomes or learning outcomes, those should all be based on the standards you have to meet for that lesson. So basically, the Louisiana Department of Education tells you the standards you need to meet for a specific type of knowledge, basically. And in here in your lesson plan, you're going to say the learning outcomes that are going to help demonstrate that the student has met that standard. So those will be in the learning outcomes and standards section. Demonstrating knowledge of resources is going to be found in classroom prep. So if we go back over here, remember the foundation stuff, that's what we're looking for, and it's classroom prep. This is your physical space. How is it organized? What materials do you and your students need to successfully complete the lesson? What technology resources are you going to have? And how are you going to manage your time and your students' behavior so you can get through the whole lesson? And then designing coherent instruction. This evidence for every single one of these will be found in your pedagogy section. And it just depends on what they're trying to prove. So like right here, they want to make sure all learning activities are matched to learning outcomes and engage students in high-level cognitive activities. This goes back to the whole thing I said, and we'll repeat over and over again. You must be able to assess learning outcomes within the context of your lesson. If you cannot assess those learning outcomes in your lesson, you cannot prove that your students met that learning outcome and that they have thus met the standard. So it's very important that you make sure all your learning outcomes are accessible and they're actually reaching that high level of understanding. And then down here, designing student assessments. We just talked about the learning outcomes some and how that's tied to assessments. They'll look for evidence of this in assessment and enclosure. So you will outline all the assessments your students are going to take. They're all going to be tied to your learning outcomes. And then you'll close up your teaching by kind of reviewing everything before, connecting that previous knowledge to the current lesson, and then connecting it to future knowledge, future unit lessons within the unit. And all of the student assessment evidence will come from that assessments and closures section. And reflecting on teaching, you'll have a reflection section that you're going to turn in for us. And that's where you're going to reflect back on the lesson, think about what happened that went well, think about what happened that didn't go well. And that way you can best improve for next time. So, like I said, I'm not going through all of these details inside the rubric for each indicator because for my class, you will not need those. You will need those way in the future. So all I'm trying to do is introduce you to the whole lesson plan and the whole rubric now. And then in another video, I'm going to show you how we're going to pare it down just for the context of this class.